All right. Well, in the interest of time, let's go ahead and get started. I hope everyone is doing well, enjoying the holiday season. My name is Kylie Craggett, and I am one of the technical assistant specialists for the Grand Families and Kinship Support Network. I am happy to be here with you today. We are a federally funded TA center to support those who work with kinship or grand families. And we respond to individual TA requests. So we invite you to submit a request if you have any questions about kinship or grand families work that you are doing in your jurisdiction. And I will put the link to that request form in the chat in just a little bit here. So we are conducting several learning communities throughout the fall, and this one is led by one of our subject matter experts, Marina Nitsa. And it was created to address the need for kin finding. So this is one of many sessions that we have conducted. All of them, all of the recordings are available on our website for you. And again, I will put that link in the chat as well if you want to go back and listen to any of the previous recordings. Today's session is one I'm excited about. It is going to be led by Heidi and Emily from the American Bar Association, and they will be sharing about how to leverage the court system to drive kin engagement. And after they finish, then we are going to hear from Rhode Island about their experiences with extreme family finding and some of the lessons that they have experienced that they still use today. So I'm going to kick it over to Heidi and Emily first to get us started.
Thank you, Kylie. I'm going to ask Emily to share her screen.
My screen. Let's see. Oops, sorry about that. Trying to get it in presentation mode. Okay. All right, welcome everybody, and it's so happy to talk to you all today. Heidi and I are going to talk to you about the role of legal professionals in kinship identification and engagement. Really quick, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Emily Peeler. I work at the American Bar Association with Heidi as part of our kinship project. The ABA is based in Washington, D.C., and we do work around the country about a variety of child welfare issues, including kinship. I'm a lawyer. That's pretty obvious based on our presentation today, but I also have my MSW. So I do try to approach the work from both the social work lens as well as that legal lens. And I'll let Heidi introduce herself as well.
Hello, thanks for having us on this meeting. We've been attending and learning from all of you, so it's fun to be able to share back. Just wanted to say a quick hello, and like Emily, I also have a law and social work background, which sometimes helps us bridge that divide between the two communities.
All right. So because we're lawyers, we did want to start off just a little bit by talking about federal laws and especially around this finding of relatives and that preference for relative placement. So all the way back in 1978, we've got ICWA, where we see the first preference for children living with relatives. In 1996, we get a federal law that establishes a preference for relative placement for all kids. And then in 2008, we get a little bit more formal with required notice and required engagement, things like that. Kin engagement and finding is also mentioned in the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act, as well as Family First, all the way in 2018. So we've seen kinship a lot. All of these laws also establish kinship navigators, all of those sorts of things. I want to look a little more closer at the Fostering Connections Act really quick. So I already mentioned that there is a federal relative preference requiring that states consider giving that preference to an adult relative over a non-related caregiver when they're looking at placement for a child if they meet all of the required and relevant standards. And there's a lot more going on around that Heidi will talk about, I think, a little bit around new ability to have kin-specific standards, which I'm sure you've all heard about. But let's dive a little bit more specifically into the Fostering Connections Act. I mentioned that it really is the first time in federal law we see that requirement for notification, and it requires states to use due diligence to identify and notify all adult relatives and parents of a child's sibling within 30 days of that child's removal. And then there's an exception for safety, things like domestic violence. So agencies, states are required to do that due diligence within 30 days of removal. The law also says that notice alone is not sufficient, that there's got to be a level of engagement there. So contact and engaging tribes early, making sure they're looking at maternal and paternal kin, as well as that fictive kin, close family friends, and using family team meetings to identify, engage, and educate kin. So that's kind of where we're starting from. That's like the landscape at the federal level and why we know that it's required to notify and engage and do this family finding. But we also wanted to share with you some best practices when we enter a courtroom. And so we've got a couple of elements here of what a real kin-friendly courtroom is going to look like. And this goes a little beyond that family finding and just thinking in general, how are we making courtrooms friendly for kin? How are we thinking kid first sometimes in that courtroom? So the first one is that meaningful participation, not just of kin if they're present, but of all participants, meaningful participation of the youth themselves, of the parent, the kin if they're present, just making sure those people aren't just sitting on the sidelines, but that they're actively engaging in that court hearing. Remembering that reunification and trauma of continued family separation remains front and center within that courtroom and all of the court proceedings. A reminder that everyone is working together to support this family, trying to remove some of the shame of asking for help, encouraging questions, encouraging the asking for resources, and then the providing of resources. Just remembering that everybody's really working together, even if there are some unique dynamics, especially if kin are involved. It's also really important that kin are informed of their choices and that they're allowed to share their perspective and ask questions. So making sure that judges are talking to kin, that they know all of their different placement options, all their different rights that come with those different choices, those sorts of things. And then finally, that courts are holding all of the professionals in the room accountable for the effective implementation of kinship laws. And that includes those family finding laws we were just talking about and any state specific and other federal laws. So holding them accountable for some of those questions and answers that they need to be able to bring to the courtroom. So more specifically, we're going to dive into identification, notice, and engagement inside of the courtroom and the different roles of an agency attorney, of the judge, of kin attorneys, anything like that. So I'm going to start us off with just the role of the court in general, including judges. So it's really imperative that judges are asking the agency, not just at the first hearing, but throughout the life of the case, what kin have been identified, notified, and engaged. We've seen this around the country. We usually see it at the beginning of the case, right? But it usually falls off when they've been placed with foster parents, those sorts of things. So making sure that's happening all of the time. And when those inquirers are asking about that language, due diligence, what efforts have really truly been made? Not just are you notifying them, but how are you looking for them and how are you notifying them? And then sometimes we call this the robe effect, but a judge should ask parents and the child in the courtroom to help identify kin. Sometimes they're telling their attorneys that they don't know any kin, but then you put them in front of the judge and the judge asks, and all of a sudden they know where paternal grandmother is. Judges should also have an expectation that attorneys are discussing the importance of identifying kin with their clients outside of the courtroom before the hearing. That includes agency attorneys talking to the caseworkers, parent attorneys talking to parents, and even children's attorneys, asking, especially for those fictive kin, and talking about how they identified them and why it's important to help identify them. If the child is not placed with kin at that first placement, make sure that the agency has made efforts to place with kin, right? This is especially important for transition-aged youth, making sure that kin, even if they aren't a placement resource, could be involved in a transition plan or some sort of other identified support. Again, another special area where it's important to think about kin is congregate settings, making sure that kin are able to maintain connections with the child. If there's treatment plans or transitioning out of congregate care, that they're considered either a placement resource or just an ongoing support for that child and that family. I mentioned ICWA was the first time we see that federal preference for placing with relatives. It's super important in the courtroom to make sure that ICWA inquiries have been made to keep their child connected to the tribe when relevant. If siblings aren't placed together, the court should be asking why they're not placed together and ensuring that visitation orders are in place, even if siblings aren't in care with them. Courts can also order visitation between the child and their extended family, again, to maintain those connections, even if they aren't the placement resource. And then when kin are present in court, making sure that they're engaged and given that opportunity to meaningfully participate. I said that was one of kind of our pillars of a kin first courtroom. So just making sure that all of that is happening to the best of their ability. Now I'm going to switch over to the role of the agency attorney. So the attorney that's representing that child welfare agency in the courtroom, I think they have a special role, especially in this identification and making sure they're reporting to all parties what they are doing to identify and notify kin. So prior to coming into the courtroom, that agency attorney should be talking to caseworkers, any kin specialists, to see what diligent efforts have been made to notify kin, and then let the court know what strategies were used, and when possible, provide documentation about all the kin that have been notified. Agency's attorneys should also be ready to tell the court what the agency is doing to engage the kin resources that have been identified, whether that's for placement or for that ongoing support. They should talk about that engagement level with those kin. And again, all of this should be happening throughout the life of the case, not just at the beginning of the case, and not just when they're placed or not placed with kin. They should also be determining what efforts the agency has made to review and discuss all options for involvement. That's what I just mentioned, whether they're placement, supportive, visitation, and make sure that those efforts have been exhausted to place with kin, and that the worker that they're going to put on the stand to testify can testify about those efforts, that that caseworker they're bringing up can talk about who they've reached out to, why grandma wasn't licensed, those sorts of things. And the caseworker should be able to talk about the parents and the child's preference. We know that these kinship situations can be unique and there's family dynamics at play. So if there is a parent or a child preference, to be able to talk about that in the courtroom. If siblings aren't placed together, the agency attorney really has a role for talking about why that hasn't happened, and what their plan is to keep them connected through visitation or other efforts. And then again, back to that ICWA inquiry, the agency attorney should really come to court knowing if that worker has notified any relevant tribes and if ICWA is applicable to the case. So again, that's just a brief overview of what an agency attorney should be doing. I encourage you to think about the agency attorneys you're working with and if they're doing these things, and if not, how you could talk to them about bringing some of these to the courtroom. I'm going to pass it over to Heidi now.
Thanks, Emily. One thing I just want to comment on is when you read the law, it weighs heavily on the agency's responsibility to identify kin. It always comes down to what did the caseworker do? What did the agency do? Did they find kin? Did they notify kin? But the thing that Emily and I would like to continue stressing is that it is everybody's job to make sure that kin are not only identified and notified, but that they're engaged. So that's why we're kind of breaking it down into thinking it through from different roles. So when it comes to the children's attorney or guardian ad litem, and every state's a little different with regard to whether a child has an attorney or a guardian ad litem or both. You'd have to know the model in your state. Really working with the child closely to make sure you're talking to them about who are their close connections, who are the people that they've either lived with or spent holidays with, and having that conversation with your client as the child's attorney or the guardian ad litem. See if they have a placement preference, and being very careful when you talk to them about it, because a lot of times when a child says, yes, I'd like to go live with, this relative, it makes them feel disloyal to the parent, that they have a preference over the parent. And it isn't necessarily that it's over the parent, it's with understanding and counsel on the part of the child's attorney to explain that at this time they cannot live with their parent. So really being careful and mindful of language is something that we stress when working with children's attorneys and guardian ad litem. If possible, and I used to be a children's attorney in New York and Maryland, we tried to talk to the kin before you came to court. It's always helpful to have that conversation and determine the level of involvement, the level of commitment. Are they a placement resource? Do they just want to do respite, visitation, etc.? But when possible, it's on the children's attorney to also find that information out, not just the agency. And advocate for those children to be able to maintain connections. Oftentimes children cannot be placed with kin, or even if they are placed with one kin caregiver, what are we doing to make sure they don't lose their entire network, their family, their history, their culture, everything that can be maintained by staying in touch with their family and making sure that's happening, whether they're placed with kin or not. We really like to pay attention that when a child is transitioning out of care, call it aging out of care, trying to figure out who are the significant people in that child's life. Because as we all know, when youth hit 18, 19, 20, 21, depending on your state, and they leave care, this whole system that we've artificially put into their life is gone. So who are those adults that they're going to turn to when they need assistance? Making sure that they have that support network. That is something that I love to think about from the beginning of a case, because it becomes that much more difficult to build those relationships if they haven't been maintained throughout. On making sure that's part of the youth's transition plan. If they're in congregate setting, as Emily pointed out, making sure that they get to stay in touch with their kin, that the kin are actively involved in their case. It's actually in the new federal law, the most recent Family First law, that they have to have kin as part of their permanency planning. That kin need to be considered as discharge resources. And finally, if a kin caregiver can't come to court, I find that the child's attorney or the guardian ad litem plays an important role in sharing information with the court on behalf of kin if they cannot be there. Next slide. So now we're talking about the parent's attorney. So making sure that they're working closely with the parent to identify kin and share that information with the agency. I think parents are often hesitant, especially at removal, to divulge any information. They're hesitant to give information because they don't want their family knowing what's happening, but trying to really make sure that they understand the positive of keeping their child in their family and making sure both maternal and paternal kin have been identified, notified, and engaged. Doesn't matter who the custodial parent is, doesn't matter who the child's being removed from. The notice requirement is for both sides of the family. Asking them if they have a preference. A lot of times a parent will say, I don't want that my child plays with so-and-so, and they'll express concern. Ask them why, exploring those problems, finding out what the hesitancy is, and making sure, again, that they understand that this is going to change the dynamics of the family, and that you understand that, but that ultimately it is what's best for the child. We have seen great results from children who have been placed with kin have resulted in a quicker reunification. Also talking to them about who is the parent support network, who can be a support for them while they go through this traumatic time, who can maybe be supervised visitation, drive them to therapy, help the child stay connected to the family and the culture. So thinking of kin, again, not just as a placement resource. Everybody should be asking about ICWA inquiries, which is why it's on every slide, encouraging kin to attend and participate in hearings, and also making sure that we acknowledge that kin have an invaluable insight on how best to support the family and achieve reunification when possible. So when we can bring kin and parents together to work together for decision making, that is really important. And coming from a parent's attorney to their client and explaining the value of that, I think is critical. So here are just a few quick state examples of leveraging the court system. I'm sure that many of you on this call could probably add to it. And if we have time, maybe we'll hear from some of you, or if you could share some of your examples with either Emily or myself, we would love to be able to elevate those. One I want to point out is Pennsylvania law when it comes to family finding in the state of Pennsylvania. The law requires them to search for and identify kin throughout the case. And making sure that they're given the first option as a placement resource. The unusual piece of Pennsylvania's family finding law is that the agency, once they accept a family for service, they're required to engage outside kin. That's even if the child's not removed and prior to removal. And I find that to be an unusual law with regard to family finding. It's usually triggered by fostering connections, which is 30 days after removal. Pennsylvania says, you know what? We want kin in from the beginning. If you're working with a family to keep them together, maybe keep the child and the parents home, we want to make sure that you're finding those kin right up front and making sure they're part of the process. And then if a child has to come in, we already know who the kin are. The other thing that the Pennsylvania law says is that the courts must inquire at every stage what the family finding efforts have been made by the agency. It's in the order, it happens at every single hearing, and at every single hearing, the agency is required to report what kind of family finding, understanding that family finding doesn't just happen in the beginning, it happens throughout the case. Another example is New York. Every state has a court improvement project, which is federally funded. We have had the pleasure of working with New York to provide these types of trainings to all their judges and attorneys on their role in supporting kinship care, including identification and engagement. The New York Court Improvement Project this year made a really big effort to celebrate National Kinship Month. And then because of the work that Emily and I have done in New York, we've been able to develop some bench cards and desk aids in some of the counties we work with. We have also had the opportunity to talk briefly to San Diego County, who unfortunately couldn't join us today, but I saw many of you are from San Diego, so feel free to unmute and join the conversation. But we heard that San Diego is doing this monthly work group with agency judges, attorneys, probation, and state agency representatives with the goal of increasing kinship placements. And they said the result is that it has really improved their working relationships to the point where they're actually going to use that same work group to start thinking about other issues beyond kinship, which I love to hear. That's great. And acknowledging that the court has a lot of flexibility with regard to kinship placement and are sometimes able to kind of cut through that red tape that the agency's stuck with regard to making sure the child gets placed with the court. So those are just 3 state examples. There are lots of great examples of states that are leveraging the court system. Again, if you want to share them, you can put them in the chat or let Emily and I know, because we would love to hear some more. All right, next slide. So in 2025, we're working on a kinship legal toolkit, which is being supported by the Dave Thomas Foundation. We will be creating this toolkit to highlight the legal community's role in supporting the use of kin. And as we keep saying, as placement resources to maintain connections and as a permanency resource, really thinking about it in all aspects of kinship. The toolkit's going to include background on kinship care for the legal community, social science research, tips for implementation and best practices, and tools to really help attorneys in the field assist kinship families. We're looking forward to working on that and getting that out to all of you. Final piece of information that I want to convey is in May of 2024, federal government put out a new rule that expanded the use of Title IV funds to be able to allow for reimbursement for costs of legal representation for kin caregivers. And it's for kin caregivers in many different areas. It's civil proceedings that are related to kinship and related to the child welfare system, but don't necessarily have to be part of the child welfare system. Things like housing, accessing public benefits, meeting the child's educational needs. And what this new rule says that the cost of legal representation is available with Title IV funds for the agency, the child, the parent, child's relative caregiver, and the tribes. Something I want to point out is that this is optional. So if your state, and we have yet to have a state take this up for kin, but we're hoping in 2025 it'll happen. This is optional. If you can advocate in your state and you want any assistance, let us know to start using those 4E funds so that kin get attorneys. It's very infrequent that a kin caregiver themselves have an attorney in a child welfare case. So this new rule allows the use of federal funding to do that. And it says even those relative caregivers who are not the foster child's legal guardian may use these 4E funds. They have very clearly said that the state itself may define relative to include kin and fictive kin. They've said these funds could be used to help establish custody or guardianship to prevent removal and to prevent the child from coming into care, or also to finalize a case plan and support a child's permanency goal for things such as kinship guardianship assistance. There's a summary linked in the PowerPoint, which I think everybody will get. Next slide. So I mentioned grandfamilies.org because that's where the summary is. That is our website that we co-manage with Casey Family Programs and Generations United. We have we have a database of all the laws on there. If you want to look at your state laws, we have 12 topics with resources, lots of publications, lots of really good information on this website. And honestly, if you've got something you want us to post from your jurisdiction, please share it. We would love to post it. Next is just our contact information. We are really happy to come to your jurisdiction and help out. We have lots of ways of figuring out how to get that funded so that it can potentially be free to you. Part of it is through the National Technical Assistance Center that we're happy to be subject matter experts. But in general, if you've got questions or a training or technical assistance need, please feel free to reach out to us. So that was it. But thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. That was really, really rich and full of really actionable information, which we just love. So thank you. Any questions for Heidi or Emily before we move on? Great. Okay. Well, we will share your slides and then folks will have your contact information and hopefully can bring them in to get your assistants hands-on, which would be great. So we are going to move on to Allie in Rhode Island to talk about some of their experience with extreme family finding. Hey,
Hi,
Allie.
how are
Hi.
you?
Good. How are you?
Good, 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 good. Snowy here, but good. Yeah, so Rhode Island is a very obviously small state, and um, we actually there's two people. We have a family search and engagement unit for the state of Rhode Island, which only includes two people, which is me and my counterpart. And we service the state of Rhode Island. So not only do we serve our child CPS as well as family services unit. We also help out with probation. We help with the kids that are in our juvenile system. We kind of hit all the different areas, and we help them all with whatever they're looking for. So, just an example of today, actually, we had somebody in probation who a kiddo is actually looking for kinship relationships. They're in a program. They're working towards permanency and seeing what that is. But it's looping back in some family members that maybe this kiddo has stated over the time in this program that they lost contact with. So we hear from probation. We hear from the Rhode Island Training School when they're creating a case plan with the kiddo prior to them leaving or even just being entered into the program. They'll contact us and ask us to send something called a TLO, which stands for the last one. And it's something that is created from like the credit bureau. And what it will do is if we put in the person's information, so say we use the parents' information, because you can't run one on a kid. They don't have any credit or phone numbers, or they shouldn't anyway. Yeah, we've definitely gotten sometimes that like parents, use their socials, but so we'll put in their information and we'll get all of the addresses that the family has used, well, the parent has used, phone numbers, and then we get first, second, and third degree relatives, and then we get something that's pretty much like a kin, so it's a possible connection. But TLO is kind of not sure how they're connected. So if you run one on me, my stepmother comes up in that area because TLO was like she doesn't have the same last name, but she has some of the same connections. So we'll run a TLO and we'll send them to the worker, and then they'll either go through them or they'll ask us to go through them. But the TLO has been a great tool for us to help find kin. We also send TLOs when a case opens to the department. It is filtered through CPS. We also have a SRU unit, which is self referrals or school referrals, people that need help that don't want to get open to CPS. We're trying to help them prior to being open to the department. We'll get referrals from them as well. But upon them opening to the department and transferring to our family service unit, we run a TLO on every parent. So right out the gate, when the case gets assigned to a worker, we're sending a TLO that's saying, here are all the relatives. Maybe the child isn't removed yet. Maybe, you need to make a safety plan to get that kiddo to stay in the home, or maybe you just need support. We're still sending those. Or 6 months in, you have a removal and you've already have this tool that you've gone over with your family, and you're able to look at it and say, they did identify 3 people on here that they could reach out to if they ever needed placement. So the TLO has been a great tool for us. We also help out when placements are needed. So we'll get contacted at any time. I was actually contacted yesterday on a placement of 3 kids, and they just said, hey, can you start calling family members? So Carol and I will take the TLO, we'll run it through our system, which our system is a richest system, and we'll look to see if anyone that worked prior to calling has any indications, but we'll start calling people. And we'll start making connections with the people on the phone and say, we give them very minimal information, like, do you know so and so? Are you related? If so, can you tell me how? And then once they verify that, we're like, okay, well, we're calling about your niece or your nephew or your grandchild. And yesterday we were able to get a placement within 2 hours. We got a placement for one kiddo, and actually the daycare provider took the other two kids. So it's just helping hands. And what's really big for Rhode Island is that, number one, we're small, but we have 3 locations, and Carol and I go to each of the offices once a week. And we're able to talk to all of the social workers and have really positive connections with the social workers and really positive outcomes, that we're the first person on their mind. When something's starting to go awry, they'll give us a call and say, hey, we have a possible placement disruption. Can you help us on a safety plan? So that really works in our favor. We've had some, really crazy stories. I know I was actually down in CPS the other day, and they send them to us at all times. And I mean, obviously, we work standard hours, but Carol and I both come from working in the field. So we know what it's like to be in the field with the kiddo that needs a placement. So if we see something pop up, we complete it. If it's 2 a.m. and I'm sleeping, you might not catch me, but last night I was downstairs at like 9:30. But I had gone down to CPS and I was talking to a supervisor the other day, and they were like, we just want to say thank you. We actually, you did a TLO for us on such and such a date. We didn't have to do any placements. We had a dad fly in from, I think, Florida. They kept the kid at DCYF for the night and had a dad fly in from Florida. They had another parent like drive in from Massachusetts and come get these kiddos. And so before even having to remove and creating this trauma for this child, we were actually able to stop it and prevent it and put the kiddo back with a bio parent. And those things happen all the time where the parent doesn't give us the information. I had one caseworker that was like, I cannot find this dad. This is the minimal information I have. And I was actually able to use social media and find him. He was a tattoo artist. And and she was like, I think this is the name of his tattoo place. And she's like, I'm not really sure. I found him and I reached out to him, and he's like, are you kidding me? She took off with my kid like 2 years ago, and I have been looking for her. I haven't been able to find her. I mean, we were able to reunify within 6 months with an ICPC. So there's a lot of different things that we use. So I use Facebook, I use Instagram, I use TikTok. TikTok with the younger generation is huge. But we're able to find things. I was able to find a mom that fled to New Hampshire through Facebook and TikTok. We were able to see a license plate that we used a TLO that identified where this person went. So it's just these little things, but if you have somebody that's looking for it and that they know what they're looking at, you're able to. We have a really good team. We have 2 special investigators in the state that only look for missing children that are open to the department. So I work with them primarily, as well as doing the TLOs, but I work with them all the time, and they might give me an address. But we also find placements for those kiddos. So for those AWOL kids that are at a house that we find them, we identify them. Our 2 CPIs that go out, they're able to get good relationships with these people that they're staying with and clear them. We see a lot of times that they're actually going to appropriate places when they're AWOL, someone that they're comfortable with, maybe a friend's mom and, an ex-aunt or uncle. And we're able to make these connections for them and able to tell their worker, hey, maybe you want to look into them because they seem really comfortable with them. And then we see a placement and we see it not disrupt because this kid already wanted to be there. And for whatever reason was afraid. A lot of our kids are afraid to tell their friends and other relatives that they're involved in the department. So once that kind of cat's out of the bag and we're calling you like, hey, do you have so-and-so at your house right now? We just pulled up to 80 East Ave and we think we just saw him go in. They're like, oh, we didn't even know he was involved. Our son didn't tell us, or he didn't tell his friend. So there's just a lot of different ways for us to use the TLO, to use the resources that we have to find placements for kids, which is really, really good. We have a high success rate of having kids with family in Canton, Rhode Island.
Yeah. I mean, you guys have, over the years that I've known you, gotten so good now at that proactive
Yeah.
money and running the TLO. But I remember a story that I will never forget about the PIs that you had, where there was
Yeah.
a sibling set, a brother and a sister that were in an institution for, I want to say, like 5 years, and
Yeah.
they didn't have kin,
Nope.
and then the PI found two cousins, and the kiddos had high levels of need, but the
Mhm.
cousins came together, rented a duplex,
Yeah.
and then we had four caregivers for the two kiddos and got them out of care. And that story really, I mean, clearly has stuck with me because I think I heard it.
Yeah.
So,
We had two teenage girls, and I don't know about other states, but we have a hard time placing girls, especially in group homes. And they're not, I mean, group homes, they just create more problems and more behaviors and all that stuff. But we had two kiddos, high needs, sisters, both in group homes. One was in our hospitalization step down. And they're like, can you please just take another look at the TLO? Can we just make, and Carol and I went through, I mean, there were so many pages. We went through and we called every single person, and we got to we got to like the associates, and we called somebody, and it was an older guy, and he was like, oh my gosh, that's my wife's grandkid. And she didn't call, if she did come up, she didn't answer the phone for whatever reason. A lot of time maybe it's a home phone that doesn't exist anymore, but he was like, you need to hold on, you need to hold on. I'm gonna get her, I'm gonna get her. And like it's 4 o'clock. Me and Carol are just like about to walk out the door, and she called us back, and she's like, "Oh my God, I want them. I want them. Give me the social worker's information." She's like, "Mom kind of cut us off because we're paternal family, and we haven't seen them in forever. But those are our granddaughters, and we don't want them anywhere else but here." And yes, immediately, yes, that they were like, we don't talk to our son, for whatever reason, he made decisions and we don't align with those decisions. But they're like, so like we want them, and they took them. We had a placement that day for them, and they were able to be back together with family, someone that they knew and had a good relationship with that just had fallen off. And it's so often where you find like people don't know that the kids are in care.
I think that's such an important story. We've heard that, or I think another state had shared recently that they encouraged all their teens to bring one supportive adult to their planning
Mm-hmm.
meetings. And that teenager brought their boss from McDonald's, who had no idea that they were in care
No.
or anyway. And that teen didn't want to share. They were embarrassed. They didn't want anybody to know. And then that McDonald's manager, like the next morning, was, like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
I'm gonna be a placement. I'm gonna be a
I
resource.
and all of my kids that I ever had that were teenagers were like, drop me off like a minute down the street. Like, don't drop me off at the door. Like,
Yeah.
we don't want to be seen with you. And I was like, I
I'm
was young at the
cool.
time. I'm hip. Like, what do you mean? But I'm not their family, and they know that when they pull up in that car with that yellow license plate or that Rhode Island license plate, they know that. So right there, you lose some of the people because they're not letting them know that they're in
Right.
care or that they possibly need placement.
Yeah.
So
So there's something special about you and Carol. I mean, you're willing to call list of 100 people.
yeah,
You're looking at license places on TikTok,
yeah.
which I would never have occurred to me until you just said now. What advice do you have for people to be like, is that curiosity? Is that kind of innate? Did you have to work on that? Like, how did you get to that point?
No, I think I was a FSU worker prior and definitely took home a lot of stuff because I just felt like every kid on my caseload, I felt that like they were mine. I felt like I had this need to get the best outcomes from them. And Carol is the same way. She was an investigator as well as um, a worker. And you talk to people that worked with her 10, 15 years ago, they're like, she's always wanted to keep kids with family. It's both, it's ingrained in us and we know the outcomes and we just care about the kids. And to us it's like, what does it matter if it's if it's 5 minutes at 10 o'clock at night when both my kids are in bed, if I go downstairs and I run this TLO and I send it to them, if it means a kid could not be in a bed that wasn't theirs. And I'll never forget, I reunified a kiddo that like didn't really know their parents very well. and for whatever reason. And that night I couldn't sleep because I have a kid. I have two. And I was sitting there thinking that they were going to bed in a house they had never slept at, in a bed they had never been in, and they had not one thing that was the same. There was not one similarity to their life, that they had lived. And I just thought about my child and like how one night at her grandmother's house, who she's there all the time and they're obsessed with her, like how that threw her off. And like I just think about the kids and I'm like, okay, well, if it could be an aunt or it could be like someone from school, they might know their favorite song, they might know their favorite color, they might know something about them that makes them feel more at home. And like you're going to see better outcomes, less trauma, like all of that. So I think that just drives us to want to do what's best for these kids and like just to try to figure it out. And like I like to find out stuff. So I'm like, what's the address? What's the phone number? All right, let me see if I can see a connection. I do like that, but I think the drive is having these kids comfortable.
Well, I mean, I love that motivation, and I suspect you have inspired a few people to try some new tools. We're gonna have
Yeah.
a session at a future event on using social media. Maybe we'll have you
Mm-hmm.
come back and talk about license plates
Yeah.
on TikTok because I think
My
that's
stalking.
no, that's good. I mean, I don't answer unknown phone numbers, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
people do anymore, right? So I think that that's increasingly becoming so important. And then and we'll talk about this in the future, but like, how do you message someone on social media and they don't think you're like
Yeah.
an
And
intense fan?
texting. Carol and I have
Yeah.
texting.
Yeah.
So a lot of times if we don't get up, like if someone doesn't answer the phone, we also like follow up the text message.
Yeah.
Because I know I don't answer like anybody's phone numbers anymore.
Yeah. And my understanding is like in the child welfare prevention space, that's increasingly a tactic too. You call and then you text and follow up and give folks a way
Yeah.
to engage. So,
Someone said,
oh,
when I find people on social media sites, do you get approval from the, yeah. So I'm asked first by like the caseworker. And I don't give out information. Like I'll just say a lot of times on Facebook, I'm looking for like moms or dads that have gone AWOL. So I'll look and I'll like verify with the social worker, like, is this the mom? Is this what she looks like? Um, and then I'll just say, like, hey, this is Allie from the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. I was asked to contact you. Could you please give me a call? Or could you, so I can verify them once they give me a call. Or they could say, like, hey, I don't have a phone to call you, but oh my God, I need to, like, I don't have my social worker's number and I haven't been able to get in touch with her. Can you give it to me? They pretty much usually know why you're contacting them. So we don't need a release because we're not like really releasing any information. We're just kind of verifying if it's them. And then from there saying like, could you give us a phone number? Could I give you a phone number? Could you maybe give them a call? Could I maybe set you up a time to come meet with your social worker? I do that with like people on Facebook. And sometimes they'll randomly message me 6 months later and be like, lost my phone again. Can you give me my social worker's number? And I'm like, yep, no problem. Here it is. But we're able to use it, and a lot of times it's super helpful. I found a dad that was living in New Britain. I think he was living in England, and his kiddo was here. And I was like, hey, like, are you so and so? Could you please give me could you please contact me? And immediately I said I'm from Rhode Island. He knew his child was in Rhode Island. He's like thank you so much, and I'll use like the translator if they don't speak our language or whatever. But he was like, could you please give me that worker's number? So it's just you can find them anywhere. You can find people in all different countries using social media, which is really helpful. So as long as you don't provide information, I'm not like, hey, Johnny's been in care for 36 months and we're looking for relatives, it's just kind of very generic. Like, are you so and so? Are you related? Can you give the worker a call? Does that answer the question? I think, yeah.
I think so. Julie can speak up if she feels otherwise.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Any other questions for Allie while we've got her? And then we'll definitely have you back to talk social media. I think we've
Yeah.
got really great guests on that topic. So, well, I thank you so much. That was really, really inspiring.
No problem. Anytime.
I think you gave folks some ideas for some ways to really go that extra mile.
Yeah.
So does not have to sleep in a stranger's home.
Yeah, I remember saying to one parent, like, when I was like putting it back, like, do you sing a song at night? Do you read a book at night? And the mom was like, I don't know that song. And I was like, just Google it.
Yeah.
Just grab it up on your phone and play it. And like that's that one piece of familiarity, like similarity to them and their normal bedtime routine that maybe might help them fall asleep.
Yeah. I think because
What
it's
computer
asking about
systems
TLO.
do we use for family searches?
I think
So
it's
we have
TLO,
our,
right? If you,
yeah, so it's called a TLO, stands for the last one. There's a lot of different ones that are around, that the like courts use or that different agencies use, but you can find them pretty easily. They're all pretty similar, just different costs. So whatever your agency is willing to pay.
yeah, I've heard Accurate is one, and like I
Yeah.
think that a lot of agencies use.
The police use they used to use TLO. It might be LexisNexis. That's what they
Okay.
use.
Yep. Yep.
So our two guys, our CPIs that go out and find the missing AWOL youth, they were previously police officers for in Rhode Island. So they'll tell us like it's very similar to what they used when they were police officers.
Got it. Yeah, I
Yep.
think his use of the PIs, and then especially the story that you told, that it's not about finding the AWOL kid and then, arresting them. It's about finding the AWOL kid and saying like, who did you feel safe going to?
Yeah.
And how can we actually like make this a more permanent arrangement? That's a really powerful story.
Yeah.
Okay, not seeing any other questions. Allie, thank you again so
You're
much. That
welcome.
was really rich with
You're welcome.
information.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Heidi and Emily, thank you so much for your portion. And then I'll pass it back to Kylie to just wrap us up.
Thank you so much, everyone. So just a reminder, I put in the chat a link to request technical assistance. If anything from today spurred your inquisitive mind and you have a question about something, then please reach out to us. And then I also put the link to all of the remaining or all of the previous sessions in the chat. So if you want to watch any of the recordings, there may be some shifting with calendar invites due to the holiday schedule, with the next one being on December 19th and then January 2nd. I believe that there's going to be some rearranging, so keep an eye on your email for any changes that may occur. And I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday season, and we will talk to you soon.
So